I think one of the problems in the West is that people take themselves a bit too seriously, especially when they come to the Dharma. And then the Dharma becomes a very heavy load on which they're carrying on their back. Well, of course, I live in India, so most of the people that come to see me, the foreigners, have come to India specifically because they are looking for a spiritual solution. In fact, most of them, alas, are looking for a guru. And they still have very much this idea of, sitting there, the guru and oneself, and sharing all their problems, and the guru giving them exactly the specific teachings that they would need, which they had never thought of, and would have a very intimate relationship with their teacher. And so much of the time, I have to try to let them down gently into knowing that in this day and age, that kind of intimate relationship doesn't happen very often. And probably didn't happen very often in Tibet, because unless you were, from a very affluent family, or you were a tulku, or you're in some way very special, you also there didn't have access to a high lama. I mean, if you were a monk in a monastery, the lama for rituals would be sitting on his throne, and everyone would feel tremendous devotion, but they didn't expect that he would be there like a psychotherapist, right? Telling them, letting them know exactly what they should be doing and how they should be doing it. They would normally go to someone maybe they knew who had done a lot of practice, but in the social order was not particularly elevated. The big lamas mostly hung out with other big lamas. What do you think?
Yes, just so. It's a little bit different with me because I live here in Spain, in the West. So people are beginning their journey, beginning to appreciate the potential of Buddha Dharma. So when we introduce the idea of refuge, like Jamie suggests, they're a little bit reluctant to appreciate the power of the Buddha of refuge, because most Westerners have rejected their native tradition, a theistic tradition. So they have adopted this very individualistic mindset. And then it's very difficult for them to value, to appreciate the divine or a spiritual force that can benefit them and offer value. So they gravitate towards meditation. They appreciate Buddha's philosophy, but it's difficult for them to appreciate the Buddha, especially in this very profound way that the Buddhism explains it, where there are Buddhas outside in the world, not just our historical Buddha, but there are many enlightened beings that are a source of refuge that can offer blessings. And at the same time, there's the Buddha within. We can discover the Buddha in the chakra in our heart. And if we penetrate that Buddha, we reach the secret or ultimate Buddha. So to reconcile this non-dual approach to the divine, where the Buddha can be outside, inside, and none other than our basic or ultimate state of mind, is very challenging, because it goes beyond our conceptual framework. It's hard to get our heads around that.
Yeah, I think that many people, after they've been reading or maybe attending courses, what often happens is that here in India, especially in Dharamshala, they have these courses for introducing people to the Dharma. And they're usually very, very well run, so people get a really good, basic impression of the Buddhist path. And so then, of course, comes, okay, I'm ready, what next? And there is the problem. Because, as you know very well, there are many traditions and there are many approaches. And I often say Tibetan Buddhism is like a Dharma supermarket, right? There's so many things on offer, which is its richness and its glory, but also can be extremely confusing and even off-putting because nobody really quite knows where to start with all this richness. So nowadays, more and more centers around here are offering courses like in basic shamatha and so forth to get people at least getting their toes in the door. And when they recognize that this really has helped them, then they begin to think about maybe we should take refuge and to try to understand how that opens up the door into the treasure house of the Buddha Dharma. It's quite interesting, actually. Because they have come all the way to India anyway, right? As I say, looking for something. That the taking refuge, and when I give refuge, at least I also include the 5 precepts, because I think you cannot really practice the path if you don't have basic ethical conduct, such as not killing and not stealing, not lying, and so forth. And of course, I ask people, are you willing to take the precepts? And they are, fortunately, usually. But I think that this going for refuge, which after all goes all the way back to the Buddha himself, gives people a sense of inner security that now they really are on the spiritual path. And so it's a good thing. And it's interesting that it has survived, that very basic ceremony has survived for 2,500 years and is still going strong.
Yes, that's wonderful.
It's, people are looking, they're lost. And of course, as you know very well, Buddhism being essentially non-theistic. We don't think that there's some big authority up in the sky arranging our lives for us. People are willing to try to make sense of their lives, finally, and put some real meaning. Along with the refuge, often some people ask if they could also take the Bodhisattva vow, which is a pretty serious commitment. And I'll sometimes tell people, wait and, and see later if you really feel that you want to make that commitment, because as you know, it's not just for this lifetime, but it's for all our lifetimes until enlightenment of all beings, which is a pretty heavy commitment.
Yes, I think a lot depends on the initial approach. Some people are very fortunate to have this very gradual ramp, and they're gradually introduced to Buddha Dharma, like you said, recognizing the potential of meditation, that their mind can change and improve. And there they have this feedback that Dharma works and they become more engaged. But sometimes they happen upon a center where there's a visiting, maybe Rinpoche giving a big series of empowerments, and they dive in the deep end of the pool with not many contexts or instructions, and that's very challenging.
Yes. So, of course, that happens here too. And people take these incredible empowerments, which is empowering as long as it's merely understood as a blessing rather than a commitment. The main problem for sometimes is that, you know, the lamas, having given the empowerment, then give the commitment. And people understand that if they break their commitment, that's it, straight down to Vajra hell. So then it comes back to the familiar ideas, which many of them have been escaping from, of punishment and, you know, just like if you don't do everything absolutely perfect, then somehow or other down you go. And so people practice out of fear rather than out of devotion. I mean, maybe they don't even have a connection with this deity until they took the Wong. And the lamas, I think, should really be a little bit more conscious of what's happening here and give either, say, look, and lamas sometimes do, but they don't always. This is a blessing for your mind stream and to give you a connection with the path. If you want to take it as a practice, then you can take it as your practice. If you don't, you just want it as a blessing, receive it as a blessing. Then that's fine. But if they say, okay, this is a commitment, from now on you have to do this sadhana every day, and heaven help you, literally. If you don't, that causes a lot of real stress.
Yes. That moment where there's a before and after, right? Where we recognize the potential. For me, I was very fortunate. I'd been meditating for a few years, and then I was invited to a weekend seminar on the Heart Sutra given by a Tibetan Lama in New York. And even though I couldn't grasp, of course, the profundity of the teachings, there was something special. I recognized that weekend that the Dharma, the Buddha Dharma, went beyond the parameters of what I understood reality to be. It went beyond my scope, right? That conceptual horizon of what is possible. And that was very interesting for me. It sparked my curiosity. And of course, I didn't commit immediately. It took a few more years of study and receiving teachings and exploring Buddhist meditation. But that first weekend was enough to recognize that there was something extraordinary about Buddha Dharma. Mm-hmm. The depth and the scope.
Yes. Well, what can I say? So since I was a very, very small child, I had believed that we are inherently perfect, but that we had lost sight of our innate perfection, and that we had to keep coming back again and again until we finally realized our true nature. And I remember asking my mother what she thought of that. And she said, yes, it sounded rational. So I thought, yes, right. And so I asked everybody, I asked priests and teachers and everybody, how do we become perfect? And always they said, you have to be good. And some said, you have to be good, you have to be kind. And even as a small child, I thought, no, that's not it. Yes, of course we have to be good and kind, but I know good, kind people, they are not perfect. There's something, our innate nature is something beyond merely being good and kind. What is it? And I tried reading all sorts of books. Even I got into sort of Sartre and Camus, and, you know, I was very fond of Dostoevsky on his spiritual side. But none of them could answer the question of what is perfection. And so then when I read my first book on Buddhism when I was 18, there it all was. It was so clear. I mean, what was so wonderful was that the Buddha gave a path. He didn't just say, it's like this or like that, but he showed how we as ordinary beings could walk the path to realizing our own innate potential. So as I read the book, I mean, halfway through the book, I said to my mother, I'm a Buddhist. And she said, oh, are you, dear? Well, that's nice. Finish reading the book, then you can tell me all about it. So, I mean, it was just a recognition of what, on one level, I had always known, but hadn't known, if you see what I mean. And so from that time, everything changed. I mean, I realized the Dharma was the most incredible thing in all the world, the most precious thing in all the world. Nothing else counted apart from that. And so then I started saving up to come to India, because I also knew, well, a voice inside me had said that I was a Kajapa. I had no idea what a Kajapa was. But I knew that my teacher was in India. So, yeah, from that time on, I started saving up to travel. And so, yeah, the Buddha Dharma, really, when you look at it, there's nothing else like it. It is so extraordinarily profound and so vast. And yeah, I mean, the most, apart from meeting my Lama, the most momentous thing that ever happened was that I met the Dharma.
That's wonderful. That's a wonderful example of the virtuous merit that awakens from previous lives, that makes us very receptive to Dharma. That's wonderful. Mm-hmm. And also, you mentioned the path. In this first teaching I received in the Heart Sutra, one thing that stuck out above everything else was the Tibetan Lama saying that the Buddha takes a very humble position in saying that I do not have the truth, we do not have the truth, because the truth cannot be conceived. The ultimate truth is inexpressible, right? So what the Buddha taught was the path towards the truth, and to finally arrive at the other shore, across the ocean of samsara, we have to let go of the ship. We have to let go of the process, of the yogas, of the skillful means, even of the words that signal the truth. So that was very eye-opening. It was very liberating to hear that message, that the ultimate truth is inexpressible, ineffable, and that somebody can point the way, but you must go forward and achieve it. And to truly realize it, to truly encompass that truth, you must let go of every notion, right? All concepts. So that was very inspiring. Mm-hmm. It's a distinctive quality of Dharma. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the main point is that it's very easy to practice the Dharma in order to make samsara more comfortable. And many people, I mean, they're not even conscious that's what they're doing, but the idea of having a mind which is well-tamed and well-trained and peaceful and sort of liberated, vaguely, whatever that means, is very comforting. And so it's very easy, I think, for us to fall into this mindset And many people nowadays, at least in the West, don't really even believe in liberation. You know, the most they are hoping for is that their defilements will grow less, and that they'll become more kind and more generous and more clear. And as with, you know, nowadays, mindfulness being used to help us deal with our stress levels, right? And for a lot of people, I think that that's basically all that they're hoping for, is that it will make life easier rather than being a revolution, basically, you know, a turning around in the seat of consciousness, as the Zen people say. They just want that the mind should become more peaceful, life should become more pleasant, that the problems in their families and in their workplaces may get easier, and in general, that's enough for one lifetime.
Yes, I think that the most surprising thing for me was how prevalent, you know, the eight-worldly dharmas are filtering in our practice. When I initiated myself into Buddha Dharma, of course, I recognized I had many limitations and many faults, but I thought at least I'm innocent. At least I have a genuine intention for spiritual development. But as you progress, you notice that we, at least in my case, I carry forth these tendencies, right, for self-preservation, for self-centeredness, for hope, for fear, that tend to corrupt, that tend to only seek gratification or immediate rewards or personal rewards. So that really limits the potential of Dharma. So just like Jetsunma said, especially these days, we tend to see Dharma as a therapeutic tool to alleviate these the imbalance we face in these challenging times. And the real practitioners, I think, are able to recognize within Dharma a new aspiration, a new potential that they didn't envision before. So we come to Dharma with our own needs, and we use the toolbox of skillful means to attend to these, but we still do not recognize a bigger problem, right? Which is the fundamental ignorance. So I go back to this first teaching, the Four Noble Truths. I think it's crucial, that lays the foundation. Buddha is giving a solution to a problem that we have yet to recognize. So we think we recognize the issues and the problems in our life, but there's a more fundamental root cause issue at hand that we have to attend to. So Dhamma has much more potential than we can imagine. The teaching, I think, just to finish, we always have to be aware that we might corrupt our practice, we might commit self-sabotage, we might trick ourselves. So we should be very careful about what occurs to our mind. We should check that according to the real text, the real teachings, and our mentor, our guru, to make sure we're not straying from the path.
Well, I think it depends. Different people are different. But in the West, and one thing which I would say is perhaps somewhat different in the East and the West, especially nowadays, is that in Asia, people have devotion. And it's very easy for them to have devotion. They have quite an open, Indians especially are very open to having devotion to anything that is put forward as being spiritual. I mean, I remember one time up in the cave above the Guru Rinpoche cave in Sopema, this Sikh family from Punjab came in, and they all prostrated to this large image, statue of Guru Rinpoche in the cave. And then the man looked at me and said, who is it? Because he didn't have a clue, but must be something, so we'll all bow down. And they felt great, respect, even though they had not a clue who it was. And I think for Asians that comes easier. Maybe Spanish people are more devoted. But in general, people take to Buddhism because it is clear, it is, philosophically very demanding, but at the same time satisfying. You don't have to believe anything until you yourself have gone through and really satisfied yourself about it, that there's meditation and so forth. The one thing they find difficult, well, people say they find difficult, it's like prostrations and the idea of bowing down to something beyond themselves. And whereas, of course, in Asia, that heartfelt love and generosity is part of who they are. In the West, people start with their heads, and then maybe it goes down to their heart. In Asia, people start with the heart, and then, they can follow it through by more intellectual understanding. But that you can see that when they all come together, that there's a very different attitude to what the Dharma can do for me and to what I can do for the Dharma as far as practice is concerned. So I don't know, in the future, maybe Asians also, but most Asians, Indians at least, have great devotion to something. They all have their guru or their devata, and they have devotion. It's easy for them.
Very good, yes. I would like to echo Jetsunma's words. I think that's, although there are many issues depending on the practitioner, in general, in the West, we undervalue the devotional aspect, and particularly the role of the teacher, of the Dharma friend, of the mentor. And in these Southern European countries, Latin America, they're more open to prayers, to rituals. So that is wonderful to include that aspect within spiritual practice. But we're still not taking enough advantage of the experience of previous generations or people that have trained in philosophy or done retreats. It's just a huge advantage to be guided by somebody more experienced. And many of my Dharma friends here in Spain tend to have a very intellectual approach. They're very educated, they read a lot of books, but they don't receive this kind of oral instruction. So Buddha Dharma cannot merely be transmitted by the word on paper. It must be from heart to heart, from mind to mind. So that transmission from one being to another being is crucial. And being part of a community of practitioners is a huge advantage, and in many cases is the factor that makes the difference, that guarantees success in the long term. Yes, I think psychology shares with Buddhism the interest in our inner state, right? We work with mind to improve our condition instead of moving things outside in the world, which of course it's important to have technological development and so on. Psychology has this inner focus, and that is shared. Now, the onset of psychology, I think, coincided with the Industrial Revolution. So the primary focus, which to this day is a guiding principle, is to recuperate a person that doesn't function in society. So when an individual becomes a burden to their family or to society, then the alarms go off, and we have to attend that person to become a contributor, right? It's a very pragmatic approach where everybody has to function in this big clockwork. Everybody's a part of this big machine, industrial machine. And that is, of course, beneficial to treat people that are not functioning well, have psychological imbalance. But that limits, of course, what we can do for other people, because there are people that function well but suffer, are depressed, hate their lives and live miserable lives. So that's very, very sad. It's not enough for somebody to carry on with their work and be self-sufficient and not be a burden to the country or their family. We should aspire to enrich the lives of others and empower them with tools for them to have a true state of well-being, of peace and happiness. So there are some developments in modern psychology, like positive psychology, and I think there's a lot more that we can do in that direction. I think all of science might be divided into two great categories, material sciences, objective sciences, and inner or subjective sciences. So psychology should develop many, many branches of treatment for the inner human condition. And in that sense, I think Buddhism still has a lot to contribute to the conversation.
Yes, I mean, of course, Buddhism spread throughout Asia many years, 1,000 years ago. And in every place that it arrived, it took on the cloak of that culture. It's very adaptable. So therefore, especially when you came to places which already had a very deep culture, like China, there was a kind of marriage going on there between Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, to come together to make something uniquely Chinese that people felt comfortable with. And the same, of course, in Sri Lanka and Thailand and in Tibet. And so outwardly, when we look at the different kinds of Buddhism in the world, they outwardly often look quite dissimilar, even though the essence is surprisingly the same, especially after 1,000 years of being separated. So naturally, when Buddhism came to the West, again, there was this kind of courtship. It's a little bit shy, but they're getting to know each other quite well. And one of the modes that the Dharma adopted interest on both sides was with psychology because of the mind. Buddhism, of course, is mostly connected with the mind and how to transcend the mind, the conceptual mind. And at the same time, psychology had some tools also which could be used. Often when I give talks in the West, in America or Australia before, I would ask, how many people here are connected with psychiatry in any way, psychotherapy or psychologists and so on. And sometimes, 60% would put their hands up because they are also very interested in many of the practices and techniques which the Buddhism has, and its method for observing the mind, not observing someone else's mind, observing your own mind. And recently, a young woman came to see me, an Indian young woman. She was doing her MA in psychiatry in Chandigarh. And she just laughed and said, nowadays, psychiatry is all about being mindful and meditating. So we spend most of our classes just meditating. So that's interesting. You know, they've taken from the Buddha Dharma what they need. It's still secular, but it is another way of approaching the mind through really beginning to observe what is actually going on and not merely, intellectually trying to get information from someone else. And I think it also, the whole idea of Jung's idea of the shadow can be very helpful too, because sometimes, even great meditators seem to have a shadow, which they haven't really looked at because it's not part of the curriculum. So it's interesting, I mean, how we can learn from others, and others certainly can learn from the Buddha Dharma, which has such brilliant practices which have been authenticated through the centuries, and to show that they work, because nobody's stupid enough to do something if it doesn't work.
Yes, it's tricky. It's tricky because, particularly for non-Asians or Westerners, we tend to grow up in one of the Abrahamic religions, and we have seen its limitations, or they didn't quite offer value for us. And then we go to university, we are exposed to higher studies, and we develop this very individualistic mindset, and we become more separated from the tribe, from others, from cultures. So we think there's only two options in the world: or we belong to the point we disappear and we're just a clone, and we're defined by society, by our tribe. There's no individual criteria. Or we are totally an individual, me against the world, and that creates a lot of stress, because at every moment you have to kind of negotiate the options, try to find out what is good, what is beneficial, what is harmful. So to the extent that we are individualistic, we are disconnected and we are alone. So when we come to Dharma, Dharma proposes to reconcile those two extremes, to be an individual but within society, and to see it as a win-win proposition, to see that to the extent that we grow and mature, we have more to offer to others. And initially, for the individualistic mindset, that is a threat. We think that if we belong, we lose ourselves, we lose freedom. But we have to learn that we can take advantage of of belonging in the community and all the wisdom, right, and support that offers, and at the same time remain responsible. At the end of the day, even if you do everything right according to a model, a prescription, instructions you follow, it will not create a satisfactory result that sustains itself in the long term if it's not your decision, if it's not voluntary, if it's not a willful, right, election. So it's wonderful to learn from others, the experience of the teachers of the tradition, the words of the Buddha, but then we have to own it. We have to decide to transform our body, speech, and mind in that direction. So the Sangha has been a crucial part in my development, and it's something I try to share with my Dharma friends. And it's challenging, right? But I think it offers wonderful potential. It's one of the three jewels, so therefore there's something extraordinary in the Sangha. And of course, Sangha as a refuge are enlightened bodhisattvas. But the Sangha, the relative Sangha in our world, which means the lay community, the monastic community, are indispensable. If we want Dharma to flourish and to sustain itself for future generations, then that is largely dependent on the Sangha, on the community.
Yes, well, I mean, I am very involved in this association called the Alliance of Non-Himalayan Nuns, which means those who get women who are ordained in the Tibetan tradition, but they are not coming from Tibet or from any of the Buddhist Himalayan regions. And at the same time, I'm living in a nunnery which is full of Himalayan nuns. So one can see the similarities and the contrasts. I mean, one thing is, of course, in Asia, usually one would go into a monastery or a nunnery at a very early age. And you are coming already from a village background in which everybody has to live in harmony with each other because, you know, they're only a small village. And so they're used to working together, doing things together. In fact, for the girls, the idea of being all by themselves alone is quite terrifying. I mean, they really enjoy and get a lot of inspiration from being together and doing things together, and even onerous tasks become quite fun if you're all doing it together. Whereas the Westerners and the other Asians who join the Tibetan tradition without being Himalayans have a very different background. They are usually, for one thing, they are highly educated. Mostly they have had professions. We have lawyers, we have IT experts, we have doctors, we have teachers, we have everybody coming from a quite intellectual background. They start when they're often, at least in their 20s, but often in their 40s and 50s. So it's like, I sometimes say it's like the Himalayan nuns are like soft clay that you can mold to the shape you want, whereas most of the Westerners are already set clay. They're already dried into their shapes, and it's very difficult to remold them. And so that is a disadvantage for living in a community, but it also can be a great advantage, because if they can live together in harmony with, especially if they have a strong teacher, revere and will follow, then they have a lot to offer, because they have all this background, you know, all this background knowledge which they're bringing with them, and which can be used for you know, furthering the Dharma. So what we are doing, because most people live solitary lives, the big problem for them, the main problem for them is loneliness, really. Lack of support, because nowadays in all the monasteries, monks and nuns are supported, but in foreign monks and nuns are not supported financially or even psychologically. And even when they go back to the West, and join a Dharma center, they're often the only monastic. And of course, in the West, monasticism now is looked on with great suspicion. Not so much if you're a Tibetan, then, oh yes, Lamaji. But if you're just an ordinary Western nun, then, you know, what's your problem? What are you running away from? Right? They would never say that to a Lama. And so it's a challenge to make the Sangha meaningful in the West. And I think more and more, because the Buddha did talk about the fourfold Sangha, but really in Asia, when you say Sangha, people think monks. It's very interesting that now in the West, mostly Sangha means the lay community. And in the Tibetans, society in the West, probably the rise of the ngakpas, you know, the household practitioners who now have their own kind of almost like a uniform and are striving very much to make themselves appreciated as a separate force in the Dharma. You know, not just ordinary lay people, but practicing lay people. So now you get a lot of these ngakpa groups around the world springing up, which is a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's interesting how they do want to feel themselves as a community with an identity. Even if they're not monks or nuns, they don't want to still be just lay people. They want to be shown as being a Sangha of sincere lay practitioners. And of course in the Sakyas, the heads of the Sakyas have to be ngakpa. I remember Sakya Tuzin, the Satyagoma, one time saying to me, it's so ironical, you have all these monks who would like to be married, and here I am, I have to be married, and I'd rather be a monk. So it's interesting in what's going to happen in the West, because I think there's never going to be a very strong monastic body. But the practitioners nowadays are highly educated, highly motivated lay people, which never happened before, because before it was always monks and even nuns were in the background. And the lay people became more and more their duty to support the monks who had the time and the opportunity for deeper study and practice. And so they were the ones that people went to for the authority. But nowadays, more and more in the West, among Westerners at least, the scholars and the teachers are lay people, and often women, which is another big jump, right?
Yes,
it's interesting.
That's very interesting. There are many changes across the decades, not even centuries, and at least in Spain and the Spanish-speaking world, most of the participants are women. Usually 2/3 of the audience and the leaders are women. So that's wonderful. And I think it's challenging even to Tibetans these days. The Tibetans in exile in India and Nepal are having a hard time keeping their monks and nuns. There's a high turnover rate of, I think samsara is becoming more competitive. Before, if you were in Tibet and you decided to give up your vows, you had to go back to the fields with your family, or to shirt the yak. But now you can have a life in Europe, you could have jobs, you could have a family, you could explore the world. So samsara is becoming very, very competitive. And I think it's crucial I'm a little biased because I'm a monk, but I think monastics, men and women, are indispensable for the long, sustaining relationship of Dharma. Because we should not only see ourselves as consumers of Dharmas, people that benefit from Dharma. We should feel that we are sustainers or upholders of Dharma for future generations, right? So that's why many a times when the lineage holders give transmissions, they give wangs and lungs that are not practiced immediately, but to be shared for future generations, so that treasure of Dharma remains available as a transmission. So, of course, we need more Dharma books translated, more institutions, more centers of Dharma and practice. But the true guarantor that Dharma will prevail in the long term for future generations is that we have realized upholders of Dharma. That means erudite scholars, learned people that can transmit the what do you call scriptural tradition, and realized yogis that can transmit the oral meditative tradition. So these are the true resources of Dharma, and everything else supports that. And to have these realized beings, it's very difficult unless you're a professional, unless you have all the time to train and invest in developing Dharma. So usually in antiquity, like Jetsunma said, that belonged to the monastics because they could dedicate themselves wholly to study, reflection, and meditation. And nowadays, I think it's very fortunate. The lay community is, having access to very high teachings, philosophical and practical teachings, and there are very serious, good practitioners that will be guides and teachers for future generations. So that's wonderful, and I'm very happy of this initiative. I've read a little bit about it before the meeting. I think we need to support the four sanghas, regardless of culture, East or West, Himalayan or non-Himalayan, and we should also make sure that the women that take this very courageous step into monastic life are supported and have all the best conditions possible to mature and be leaders and teachers for future generations. That's also one of my missions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, let's hope. The Fourfold Sangha was always very at the heart of the Buddha's aspiration for his Dharma. He said when the Fourfold Sangha studies and practices and propagates the Dharma, then the Dharma can be said to flourish. And so through the millennia, it's got, because the monks mostly were the ones who had the education and they had the time and they had the aspiration for study and practice, mostly it was placed with them to uphold the Dharma. And the lay people were mostly there just to support them so that they could study and practice. Now it's changing round, and it's never done quite like that before, that more and more of the people studying and practicing are lay people, and less coming from the monasticism. But I also, of course, I've been a nun 60 years, so I can't put down being a monasticism. But I think the monastics themselves need, in the West, it's important to have monastics to show that a life of chastity and a certain frugal way of living, contentment with little, the same old clothes day and after day, and just living a very life of simplicity with study and practice at the center of your life is a very happy life, or a life well lived. When we look at our nuns here, who are now, young and teenagers and older, they're so happy. And everybody notices it, that, wow, these young girls, they're so full of joy. And that's one of the contributions, apart from the actual scholasticism on realizations, the inner peace and joy of living in simplicity and purity, which we've lost in the West, where the idea is the more you get and the more relationships you have and the more you get involved, the more content you will be, the more satisfied you will be. But it's not true. And the people who can show how untrue that is, I think, are those who are living a lifestyle which is in direct opposition to that nowadays lived in both Asia and the West, where materialism has so completely taken over, and consumerism, to show that you can live a completely different life and be so happy and content. And, the joy, true happiness is within us and not dependent on external situations. I mean, you know that very well. But it's important that people are reminded, even in Dharma circles.
Yes, I think you're quite right. The world is thirsty for another viable model of what life could be, and we can't just speak about it. It has to be working before their eyes, so that you could see the possibilities. And it's wonderful that you've developed this community in the near Dharamsala. I've only visited once, but it was very nice, feeling very nice energy there. I'm curious. One thing I remember about the community is that it's, I think, broken up into modules, like groups within a group. So there's the nuns live in proximity to each other in different blocks. Is that right?
Well, I mean, they live together 2 to 3 to a room, and the rooms are kind of in a circular mode with an open courtyard. But all the nuns go through a 12-year study program, and then after that, many of them choose to go into retreat. That's, for me, the main point is not only that they should study and debate, and they debate with our monks too. Down the road is our monastery of Kampaga Tashijong, and the monks come to debate the nuns, and the nuns go there to debate the monks, and they all enjoy it enormously. We have very good relationship with our monks. Our monks are very, very kind. But then we also have a retreat center, and some of our nuns have been in retreat now for 16 years and have now finally been acknowledged as being yoginis or tokdenma. And some of the nuns have, after graduating, many nuns have graduated by now, of course, but they also, a group of them have been teaching the other nuns. And so now they have also been recognized as Khenpos. So nuns are coming up, not just in our nunnery of Donjigatseling, but all over. The education was the key. And once they began the monks realized that the nuns actually were very intelligent and very, very keen and focused, really, really, really keen. They began to love teaching them. And so a very nice relationship has grown up between monks and nuns now are really going ahead in a way which is very encouraging for these young women. They really see they have all sorts of ideals of how they want to move out also into back to their villages and start teaching the lay people. and reviving the Dharma in their own regions again. So it's good.
It's wonderful. One thing you mentioned brings to mind this tricky balance, right? For example, when traditionally monks go to monastery when they're 7 years old, their family usually sends in old Tibet their second boy to the monastery, right?
Yeah.
And some of the Tibetan women that I met that are nuns in Nepal or India made the decision a little bit later, when they were teens. So it was more conscious, right? And many Westerners, as you said, decide to become monks and nuns in their 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s. And you mentioned that the older we get, the more, what do you call it, firm and hard and established and less malleable, less flexible, less capable of growing and changing. So then we have this dilemma. If we begin too early, then usually it's not our own choice. And then many monks grow up and find themselves that they don't have a religious inclination. They feel trapped, and they're trying to find a way out, a visa to the West. And then on the other hand, if you decide too late, then you're already too structured, right? It's hard to find the middle way.
Yeah, I mean, some of our nuns were very young when they came. I mean, to be honest, I mean, they're 3 or 4 years old. But so happy. And they're still with us 10 years later, and very good nuns. They're very happy nuns. But ideally, when I started it, we had a rule that you couldn't join before you were 15 years old. Because my thought was you should finish school first. And then if you decided you wanted to be a nun, as you're saying, it would be your conscious decision to do that, rather than you're put in there by your parents and you don't really have too much choice. So, yeah, on the other hand, when the girls we got from Bhutan usually came in their 20s and had previously had professions. One worked for television, one was a maths teacher. I mean, they're different professions, then they decide they want to be a nun. But for them, the problem was that they could not memorize. Tibetan Buddhism is very much based on memorizing. Scholastically, you memorize a text. You don't just read it. And the little ones were like sponges. They could memorize like anything. You know, they had it all rolling out. But these older, much more sophisticated Bhutanese young women were in despair because they had never utilized that part of the brain for memorizing in their very modern style education, which they get in Bhutan nowadays. So it's always, you know, whichever way you go, there are challenges. Who's going to answer that one? Go. Well, you have a community. You have such a large community, so you can speak from your experience.
I think one advantage is to normalize Dharma practice, because sometimes we feel not worthy. You know, I'm not capable of practicing, of changing. But then you meet monastics and you realize that, yes, they've taken this very courageous step, but they are just like you. They have faults, they have fears, they have troubles, but they are committed, right? They're doing their best effort to improve themselves and offer some service to the community, right? To Buddha Dharma. So then that gives us inspiration. That gives us more self-worth, right? Because I notice one of the great challenges in general, I think this is cross-cultural, is lack of self-esteem. And the Buddhist perspective is very ambitious. We want to transcend samsara. We want to, like Jetsunma said, awaken to this perfect state of being. So we have to have not only courage, we have to believe in this potential that we all have Buddha nature. And even though in the present condition I'm affected by patterns of conduct that are negative, or mental afflictions and all these things, I can potentially purify myself. I can develop merit and wisdom. I can be of some service to others. So by seeing an ordinary person make a little bit of an improvement, then that directly gives us a very strong message that I can do the same. I should explore it. I should try it. And then when you discover a really realized teacher that is very trained and has a peaceful mind, and like Jetsunma said, is very happy and truly satisfied and fulfilled, that is real evidence that Dharma works, and that if another human being can do it, so can I.
Yes, and I think it's absolutely that. And also when we do things together, sometimes it's not as onerous as if we are only doing it on our own, and we don't have anywhere to turn to for support or for lightness. I think one of the problems in the West is that people take themselves a bit too seriously, especially when they come to the Dharma. And then the Dharma becomes a very heavy load on which they're carrying on their back. In addition to all the other problems in their life, the Dharma and their aspirations get kind of heavy. So it's always good to be in a community which lightens up, you do things together which even difficult tasks can become fun if you all bring the right attitude towards it and stop taking ourselves and everything too seriously. I mean, yes, we are as sincere as possible, but not, that kind of heaviness that sometimes you find in people who come to tell you about what they're doing and how their practice is, and it's all, just relax, lighten up, and then, oh, yes, we can do that. Yeah, you can do that, I mean, and in a community, therefore, if it has a kind of, like the Dharma acts like a kind of yeast to lighten up the whole heavy dough of our daily commitments and our daily life. The Dharma should make us, the Buddha himself said that the Dharma is a path of joy. And that even if it was a path of suffering, it would be worthwhile. But it is not a path of suffering, he said. It's a path of joy. So therefore, all the more reason to practice, because it should, eventually, one of the signs should be that it makes you feel liberated inside, spacious, open, present. And as you know, I mean, the great lamas are always laughing. I mean, in the face of all the difficulties of samsara, which everybody knows about, still accepting that and working on it together brings a kind of inner liberation, that we're all helping each other. And if you have problems, you can go and tell somebody. You're not alone. And everybody would say, yes, yes, I had that same trouble, but don't worry because, and that's your family, your Dharma family. And they're there for you if you need them. That's how a Sangha, to my mind, should be, in harmony and supporting each other. I mean, just thinking today, that's not what I really mean, but one of our nuns somehow or other fell down and broke her ankle. And I was just watching today, this nun was carrying her on her back up the steps to the temple, right? You know, and all the other nuns were laughing and laughing, and everybody was laughing. And so it wasn't any big tragedy, any big ordeal, because everybody was helping each other, and even the one with the broken ankle was laughing, right? So like that, we should have that. The Dharma is so wonderful, it's so incredible, so absolutely amazing in this world, that it should bring us joy.
Yes, quite so. Very good. Yes, thank you so much, Jetsunma.
Thank you, Khenpo-ji.
How is your health?
I'm fine, we're good. We've just done, well, the nuns and the lay people from Tashijong and Philippe here, and everybody just did a week of Nyungne, of the fasting and prostration retreat. So then that's a perfect example, right? If you're starving yourself, you're fasting and you're doing all these prostrations and chanting all by yourself, oh dear, I'm so hungry, I'm so thirsty, I'm so tired. But when you do it in a temple full of everybody doing it together, then again, it's joyful, you know, everybody has the devotion and the enthusiasm to keep going and to be part of something, not just separate, but an integral part of something beautiful, which you're all doing together.
That's wonderful. So my prayers, my best wishes for your community. I hope the Dharma continues to flourish there. And I hope to see you in the future.